Hiya, still talking about copyright. Let's crack on with that. We're into the third video, and we're going to look at defences and remedies involved with copyright law. Key defences. First one is called fair dealing. Really important defence, and the other main one is public interest. We can use a public interest defence as well. So let's look at fair dealing. Various types of fair dealing defences. So for the key one is fair dealing for the purpose of reporting current events. This means that you can use certain certain original works, which may be protected by copyright, but as long as you provide sufficient acknowledgement, so give the work's title or description or the name of the author or the creator in order to report on current events, that might be possible. So if you're covering a discovery of a Banksy painting of something of that sort, you're able to do that, because obviously it's an original work. But if you're reporting on that appearing at Media City, you are covering current events, so you could photograph and as long as you acknowledge that it's by Banksy and make it clear what it's about, and you can't take unfair commercial advantage of that original work. So you couldn't then start launching a series of T-shirts with the Banksy painting on the front of it in order to and say that you're just you couldn't argue fair dealing for the purpose of reporting current events, because actually you're clearly not then reporting current events. That would be reporting that a Banksy painting has appeared at Media City. What you're doing then is taking unfair commercial advantage by selling T-shirts with it on. But really important point here is that you couldn't use a fair dealing defence for using somebody else's photographs. It doesn't apply to photographs. You can use it for video clips, but you can't use it for still photographs. So if you went you found that somebody had taken a picture of Banksy doing the painting, it's actually got a picture and you can actually see Banksy's face in it, the first picture of Banksy revealed. You think, oh, that's a great picture, I want to use that. You would need to you couldn't just use it, you couldn't just take it without permission, because the photographer would own the copyright to that photograph, and you couldn't argue fair dealing as a defence for using it. Because if you think about it, the whole essence of a news photograph is in the few days that it's current, and when it's a news photograph. If you could say, oh well, I'll use a fair dealing defence, it just mean that all news photographs were just stolen all the time. So the defence can't be used for still photographs, but it can be used for video clips. So be aware of that. There's another kind of fair dealing for the purpose of criticism or review, and this might go to the heart of an art exhibition or something of that sort. So you can't sneak into a gallery the night before it's revealed and go and take those secret photographs and then publish those of all the works that are in it, because that would be it won't have been made available to the public. But once it has been made available to the public, you would be able to publish photographs of those works of art, because those sculptures or those paintings or whatever, they attract copyright because they're original works. But if you're reviewing or criticising that exhibition, you can argue fair dealing, but you must provide sufficient acknowledgement about who actually created those works. There is also a public interest defence. So if you are publishing material to reveal immorality or an issue damaging public life or health or safety or the administration of justice, or a work which incites immoral behaviour, you could argue public interest. Importantly, this does include photographs. So a classic example is a a group of what they call urban explorers break into, or they get into places, sometimes quite sensitive places, and I think they got into a place where lots of highly sensitive communication cables were running through a tunnel, and a newspaper published a photograph which they had taken of themselves posing in front of all this really sensitive infrastructure. And the group, this Urban Explorer group, tried to take legal action against the newspaper for publishing their photograph, because they said that they had broken their copyright, or they had breached their copyright, because they'd used the photograph that they had published online. And the newspaper successfully defended it on the interest of public, on the basis of public interest, because they said that it was criminal behaviour, and that it was creating a public threat to sensitive infrastructure, and therefore they could argue public interest to defend the use of the photograph. Other defences, so you can have acquiescence, so you can have people who've basically agreed to material being used. Incidental infringement, so if you were outside a photographer's studio, you were covering a crash that happened outside a photographer's studio, and in the background of your the photograph you had taken of the crash, there was it was included a photograph they had in their shop window. They could not, if they did try and say that you breached their copyright by publishing an image of their photograph, you would be able to say, well, it was incidental. The main purpose of the photograph was to show something else. And innocent infringement, I didn't know it was copyright, is the answer there. But you can't just say, well, I didn't have a clue that there was such a thing as copyright law, because that's just ignorant. You're expected to have a decent understanding that there was copyright law, but there may be situations where you understood that the copyright had either been waived or that the copyright no longer existed on a piece of work. So that's very quickly rattled through defences. Fair dealing and public interest are your main ones, but the really important thing about fair dealing is that it doesn't cover photographs. Still photographs are not covered by the fair dealing defence. So the key message is don't just blunder into the internet and take things. You can't do that. Everything is owned by somebody. So I know you've already looked in your multimedia reporting module at how to find copyright-free images. So these are images that somebody's taken, but they have placed them onto the web and said that they are waiving their right to the copyright over that picture. So you can use copyright-free images, but the very, very best way to make sure that you don't breach copyright is to take the picture yourself, because if you take the picture, you own the copyright, so you can do what you want with it then. But just be aware that everything is owned, and there's no such thing as just sneakily taking a picture from the internet. No one will notice. Well, if nobody's noticing that means you're not really doing your job properly, because people are supposed to be noticing what we do, and you will get an audience. So yeah, really need to understand copyright. So the reading for this week is McNay's chapter 29, so make sure you've read that chapter. Next week, Sarah's going to be back with you, and she's going to be doing an exam revision session. So she's going to be going back over all of the key points from each of the weeks, over each of the areas of law. I really strongly recommend you go back over the weeks, have a look at the slides, but go through the question handouts we've done each week. Those are typical exam questions, and you can now see all the answers, typical model answers for each of those exam questions. If you go through each of those workshop question sheets and you satisfy yourself that you know the answers to all of those questions, you will be absolutely fine in the exam, because the exam will not be too dissimilar to the sorts of questions which we've been covering in the workshops. But Sarah will be going through and giving you some pretty good pointers and some fairly strong direction about what you should be looking at for the exam. It is a very broad exam, so it will cover most of the subjects we've covered through this module, but she will give you some pointers, so you'd be daft to miss that session next week. But in the meantime, I will see you at the workshop on Thursday when we'll go through some sample exam questions about copyright. So I will see you on Thursday. Cheerio.